Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for today's Ius Laboris client webinar on coronavirus managing a workforce in the Nordic countries in challenging times. My name is Annie and I'm the Business Development Coordinator at Ius Laboris, and I will be facilitating this session for you. Our presenters today are all lawyers from the Ius Laboris firms in Denmark, Finland, Sweden and Norway. Okay, I will now hand over to our first speaker, Yvonne Fredriksen from Denmark. Go ahead, Yvonne, you are welcome to start.
Hello, thank you, Annie. My name is Yvonne Fredriksen and I'm a partner in Norway-CURRENT in Copenhagen, the Ius Laboris firm in Denmark. On behalf of the Ius Laboris firm in the Nordics, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, where we are going to cover some of the legal challenges employers are facing in the Nordics due to the coronavirus crisis at the moment. My co-speakers today are Seppo Havia from Ditmar and Indrinius in Helsinki, Jenny Helberg from Elmsell in Stockholm, and also Claude Lent from Hjort in Oslo. We often work closely together when we are advising clients in cross-border issues, and during the corona crisis we have several times advised clients on the legal aspects of managing a workforce across the Nordics. And today we're going to share some of our experience with you. The webinar is structured as follows. Each of the four speakers will give you an overview of first, the current status of the lockdown situation in different countries, then the most relevant issues in regard to managing a workforce in the current situation, an overview, third, of the different legal initiatives and government support schemes that have been put in place in the different countries, and finally, a glance to the future. What should we expect in the nearest future in regard to reopening, etc. But first we will start with Denmark, where I will myself do the presentation. Denmark has chosen the LOCKDOWN-LITE approach, which was effectuated from the 13th of March. Accordingly, people in Denmark has been allowed to go outside, participate in outdoor activities, as long as they keep a distance of 2 meters and comply with a number of guidelines from the authorities. There has been a gradual reopening starting from the 14th of April, and the situation right now is that we have actually reopened school for the youngest pupils. All childcare institutions has been opened. There are still limited space because they are under strict regulation in regard to social distancing and also sanitary and cleaning requirements. So this means that there are still employees facing trouble having full-time childcare support in their normal childcare institutions. But all institutions should be opened now. All universities, indoor cultural institutions, gyms, etc. are closed. The same applies to all shops in shopping centers and malls, whereas shops outside malls are generally open. There's also been a gradual reopening of certain shops and businesses that have been banned on opening, and that is hairdressers, dentists, and physiotherapists that reopened from the 20th of April 2020. Private sector employees have been required to work from home to the extent possible. The same with public sector workers. Public sector workers still have to work from home unless it's essential employees, e.g. in the health industry, whereas private sector employees are allowed to start working from the offices, but again under quite strict requirements to ensure social distancing and also to comply with cleaning and sanitary requirements. And of course that means that private businesses, companies are facing some challenges right now in ensuring especially the social distancing when people come back to work. And generally there's a ban on all gatherings of more than 10 participants in the public area. So that is not allowed, but as I mentioned, if you are less than 10 people, you could go in the street, you could go to the park, etc., as long as you keep the social distancing. I would then go to the challenges and when it comes to workforce management. As I mentioned, that since there is strict requirements on the social distancing, there are right now a lot of focus on employers to introduce working in shifts to ensure that not all employees are in the workplace at the same time. Also, of course, policies on meetings to reduce meetings if at all possible, physical meetings if at all possible, travel policies, etc. It's not been a problem in Denmark to impose teleworking, working from home. That is generally allowed as long as the work allows working from home. Another issue that is interesting is that in Denmark you can generally not send employees home if there's no work with no salary. You can only do that if you have a specific possibility to do so in a collective bargaining agreement. If you don't have that possibility in a collective bargaining agreement, you can still send the employees home if there's no work, but the employees must be paid full pay during such home sending. In that regard, we differ a bit from the other Nordic, or some of the other Nordic countries. I will get back to that in a bit later, because that's why we have introduced a specific wage compensation scheme from the government. Employees may be required to take holiday. Normally, there's a notice period of 1 to 3 months if you want your employee to be imposed to take holiday. In the current situation, it is generally agreed that you could in fact impose the employees to take holiday with no notice. Also, there's a possibility that has been introduced in the Danish Holiday Act to require employees to postpone holiday due to force majeure situation. If you go to the next slide and we focus on the government support schemes, there are different types of support schemes, actually quite a lot. And I would say that the most interesting for employers in Denmark right now is the wage compensation scheme for private sector businesses that are facing a situation where they would normally have to dismiss at least 30% or more than 50 employees. This wage compensation scheme is in place for employers covering right now the period from 8th of March to 8th of July. It was just 3 days ago actually prolonged to the 8th of July. So if any of you have heard that this wage compensation scheme is only valid until the 8th of June, this has actually been amended now and prolonged the period till the 8th of July. If you apply to be covered by the wage compensation scheme, you can get a reimbursement from the government of up to 75% or 90% depending on the status of the employee, however capped at 30,000 Danish kroner per full-time employee. You could also combine this with an agreement with the employees to reduce the salaries. That several employers have done that, but it is very important that a number of specific conditions must be met if you want to combine an agreement of salary reductions with the wage compensation scheme. So that is very important to be aware of. Also, there has been a number of other support schemes. They mentioned some of them here. The most important are mentioned here. there is a possibility to agree with the employees on a plan regarding distribution of work, which will mean that the employees work part-time, but they will also get then reduced salary, and then the employees could apply for a supplementary unemployment benefit. But again, strict conditions apply if you want to agree with the employees to enter into such an arrangement, so it's very important to be aware of that. One last thing I was mention is that if you want to use the wage compensation scheme, you could decide, there's not a ban against dismissing during that period, but if you do that, if you decide to dismiss, the wage compensation period will automatically lapse. So if you decide to dismiss, you will automatically step out of the wage compensation scheme and can get no more reimbursement of salaries. That is very important. Finally, moving to the next slide here is, what about the future? Yes, it's very difficult, of course, to predict. Right now we are in a phase of gradually and carefully reopening. We will have to see what will happen next. Probably 10th of May is the date where we will see new initiatives coming up, but everything will depend on how things goes on, how the numbers of infected people look like, and how the number of hospitalized people will look like at that time. There's a ban on large events, I would have to say also, that has been extended till the end of August 2020. Right now it's 10 people in the public area, but we will for sure not see big festivals or big events going on during the summer. That's it for now for me, and I will pass the word to Seppo from Finland.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne, for your presentation. Yes, my name is Seppo Havia, and I work as partner at Titmaret Internews in Finland. And I will give you a brief overview of the Finnish situation as follows. The Finnish government declared a state of emergency in Finland on 16th March. So we've been in the very different situation and in a kind of a emergency situation also in regards to the law so far around 5 weeks. The idea to take use of this emergency legislation and the so-called Emergency Powers Act in Finland was to slow down the spreading of the coronavirus and to protect the specific people belonging to risk groups. This is, as I said, very exceptional situation, and last time these Emergency Powers Acts and related acts were used was during the Second World War, actually. What this then means in practice, the Finnish government has pretty much the same, decided on pretty much the same restrictions as in Denmark. However, there are some minor differences. All universities, schools, kindergartens are closed, except for pupils in the age of 7, around 9, so years 1 to 3, and some other students. All restaurants, cafes, bars are closed. Takeaway food is permitted. Sports centers, cultural facilities, gyms, libraries, museums, they are all closed at the moment. Spending time outside in public places is not recommended, and public gatherings are limited to 10 people. All Finnish borders are closed, and the travel into Finland is suspended. However, delivery of goods and some restricted work travel is possible still. and all unnecessary travel abroad is prohibited. What is then permitted? In a nutshell, the borders of Uusimaa, which is the part of southern Finland, province of Uusimaa, we could say basically Helsinki region, southern Finland, was closed on the decision of the government as from 28th March until 15th April. So the borders were closed quite lately, and now it's possible to travel within Finland. However, government strongly suggests that all traveling should be avoided. And the idea is, of course, once again, to slow down the spreading of coronavirus to other parts of Finland. Travel back from abroad to Finland is permitted for Finnish citizens and people living permanently in Finland. However, there are some restrictions, for example, 2 weeks quarantine when they return Finland. Outdoor exercise is, however, permitted, provided that there is a safe distance, or the safe distance is maintained, which is typically around 2 meters. In Finland, shopping centers and shops have remained open still. So then about employers' obligations and workforce management, health and safety measures, of course, strong recommendations given by the Institute for Health and Welfare in Finland and the Institute of Occupational Health, which are institutions that give recommendations and advice as regards health and safety issues. According to them, employers should ensure that all employees are aware of good hygiene and distancing practices. And the cleaning of shared spaces especially is strongly recommended. At the moment, basically all work should be and is very much carried out remotely as much as possible. At the same time, employers have then to ensure that well-being and work safety of employees working from home is secured. And as of the beginning of this year, 2020, 1st January 2020, the new Finnish Working Hours Act entered into force, and it clearly states that the homework or remote work is also under the application of the Finnish Working Hours Act. It wasn't so clearly before this change, but now it is, and which means that all working hour regulations basically are also applied to remote work, working from home, for example. With regard to management of the workforce, there is a temporary amendments in place to employment legislation in Finland. And this was a very quick legislation procedure, quicker than never seen before actually, which was completed only in a bit less than 2 weeks' time. The whole procedure after the labor organizations gave a proposal for the changes to these employment laws to the government. They gave it on 18th March, and then the laws, these temporary amendments, entered into force on 1st April. And they will be in force only 3 months, from 1st April to 30th June this year. They include several major amendments on the current legislation to ease the companies struggling with this corona crisis and management of the workforce. For instance, the so-called consultation and notice periods regarding temporary layoffs. Layoff in Finland means that you suspend payment of salary and working for some restricted period of time. Typically and normally you have to, in order to be able to lay off people, you have to have cooperation consultations meetings. The invitation must be given 5 days prior to invitations. Then invitations have to last either 2 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on the number of layoffs and the length of layoffs. But now all this can be done in 15 days. 5 days invitation, 5 days negotiation period, and 5 days notice period, and then enforce the layoffs. And there has been mass of these layoff procedures during the last month in Finland, and hundreds of thousands of people are so far laid off in Finland. In connection of these temporary amendments, also the so-called rehiring period for redundant employees was extended to 9 months instead of normally applied 4 or 6 months. Further, the cancellation of employment during a probationary period is now also possible, also on financial and production-related grounds. And in that case, there is no rehiring period or rehiring obligation to be allowed, nor any cooperation consultation procedure obligations. And employees on fixed-term contract may also be laid off. Normally, you cannot lay off, generally speaking, employees on a fixed-term contract. Then we move on to the government support schemes. The government has decided to give direct financial support and loan guarantees for businesses. For example, Center for Economic Development, or centers, they are many local centers. They grant direct financial support to companies employing 1 to 5 employees, so minor companies, up to euro 10,000. And Business Finland organization grant direct financial support to mid-size and major employees up to 100,000 euros. The sums can even be bigger if it's intended for development of those companies. And the Finnish Winvera can grant loans of up to euro 1 million to companies suffering from corona crisis. Pension contributions regarding the employer part have been temporarily reduced by 2.6 percentage points from 1st May to 31st December, i.e. the rest of the year time. And the employees, as regards employees, they of course, for example, during the laid-off period, they are entitled to get unemployment benefits from the state or unions funds, unemployment funds. And the government has now abolished, took away the so-called 5-day wait period for the eligibility for unemployment security. So the employees begin to get those benefits right away when they have been laid off. Also, the so-called requirement of eligibility for unemployment allowance based on the length of employment have been shortened from 26 weeks to 13 weeks. Between 1st April and 31st July, laid-off employees are also entitled to unemployment benefits, even if they are engaged in business activities or study. They can, which means that they can get another employment and not losing the unemployment benefits. And then lastly, what of the future? In generally speaking, Finland is a bit behind other Nordic countries regarding the pandemic situations and infections. in numbers. So far there hasn't been so much discussions on easing or relieving these restrictions. However, the Finnish government is actually at the moment gathering and discussing today the possibilities to certain reliefs, for example, educational relief, and schools may be opened in the short future. The government will have this evening a press conference to announce what they have decided. So we'll see what happens in the evening. Furthermore, there are 2 working groups tasked with preparing a plan for Finland's way exit out of the COVID-19 crisis. The other one is a short-term exit plan working group, which specifies or concentrates more on rectifying health, social and economic damages caused by the pandemic. And the other one, the economic working group, will assess more like long-term economic impact of the pandemic and ways to return back to sustainable growth. And then finally, the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare will investigate further the spread of the virus in the population using different test methods, for example, so-called antibody tests. So for now, this for Finland. Thank you, and I will hand over now to Jenny.
Thank you, Seppo. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jenny Hellberg. I'm a partner at the Ius Laboris firm Elmshäll in Sweden. I'm based in Stockholm. As many of you already know, Sweden has taken a different approach to Corona compared to most other countries, not only the Nordics, but also in Europe and worldwide. The Swedish approach is not to have a lockdown, but there are, of course, a number of restrictions, but not prohibitions or strong recommendations, and what we would call and refer to as common sense, how to behave, for example, social distancing. However, we have learned that internationally, media has made it appear that we are not doing anything here in Sweden. That is far from true, I must say. Still, secondary schools and universities are closed. Public gatherings are limited to 50 people, and there are limitations in restaurants, shops, etc. To the extent possible, people are asked to work from home and avoid not only public transport, but not to meet colleagues at work, for example. In Stockholm, where I am, this is also upheld, and the vast majority of office workers work from home. So what does this mean for employers then? Apart from what goes without saying in terms of general safety advice, and as my colleagues already have mentioned, employers still have responsibility for the work environment for the employees working from home. This means that the employer must do a risk assessment from a work environment perspective. This means that the employer needs to ensure that the home workers have a safe workplace. For example, the very evidence, such as work equipment, to provide employees with a screen, keyboard, suitable chair, as well as being very clear on expectations when it comes to what employees should do work-wise, i.e. to have regular meetings or calls with them. But what we have seen over the past weeks focuses more on the organizational and social activities, the fact that managers have to take on more responsibilities in terms of the employees' well-being. For example, regarding workload, do people have a lot to do, or do they have little to do? That might be a stressful situation, or is it stressful to work from home, for example? And I guess you all have seen different innovations on how to interact between colleagues with online coffee breaks, etc. And as many of you probably know, coffee breaks, or fika in Swedish, are indeed very important. I think the four of us have all experienced that the questions we have received from clients over the past weeks have changed, And the hottest topics right now in Sweden is about vacation. If people cannot leave their hometown this summer, they might neither want to take vacation. Well, from the employer's perspective, you should make sure that your employees take vacation. Otherwise, you will end up with a lot of accrued vacation days, which have to be paid in cash to the employees if not used later during the year. Employees, they have a legal right to 4 consecutive weeks of vacation during June to August. Even though it is the employee's right, it's also a possibility for the employer to force employees to take vacation. It's actually a work environment perspective on this. Employers shall make sure that the employees take their vacation in order to have time off from work and hopefully also be back energized after vacation. They need to agree when to allocate the vacation, but if such agreement cannot be reached, the employer can decide when those days shall be taken during these months, June to August. Another question that has been asked is if there is a ban to dismiss employees due to the corona situation. We have heard a little bit about that from Denmark and Finland, but in Sweden there's no such ban, and if the employer has to make employees redundant while the employer receives state support, which I will speak about in a minute, the state support will cover for the notice period. This is an exception during the corona crisis to the normal state support legislation that normally doesn't cover for this. I will now speak a bit about the government support schemes that are relevant from an employment perspective. I will start with the ones at the bottom of the slide. First of all, sick pay. As people are asked to stay home if they have any kind of symptom related to corona, the state also has taken over the responsibility to pay sick pay to ease employers' burden. Normally, the employer pays sick pay during day 2 to 14 of sickness, and now the state instead does. The same goes for the first day of sickness, which usually is a waiting day with no pay for the employee. Right now, the employee can apply to receive compensation for that day by the state. Secondly, Social Security contribution. Employers usually pay 31.42% Social Security contribution on top of any salary payments in order to help, in particular small and mid-sized companies. Companies will only pay 10.21% during March to June for up to 30 employees. And that's up to salaries of 25,000 Swedish crowns, which is approximately 2,300 euros. Now, the support scheme that we have in Sweden. As you have heard, there are, to some extent, similar schemes in the other countries. The aim with the support scheme in Sweden is that the cost for the scheme shall be divided between the state, the employer, and the employee. And at the same time, the employee shall work less hours. As you can see in the second column on this slide, the reduced working hours for the employee shall be 20, 40, or 60. While reducing their working hours, the employee shall also contribute by reducing their salary with 4, 6, or 7.5%. You can also see that there's a new proposal to reduce up to 80%. So the aim with this is for viable companies where there is less work to do to keep employees during this crisis instead of making them redundant. While reducing the working hours and salary for employees, the employer will receive state support for the part of the salary cost. And we will slightly see that on the next slide, might be a little difficult to see, but you can also have a big screen to maybe see it a little bit better. At the very top there, this is an example where the employee works 40% and the cost for the employer is 47.5%. And the employee's reduced pay is 7.5%. Whereas the state pays for 45%. Now we'll go back to the previous slide a little bit. Jesper, might you be able to unmute if you are still muted? You can also see that the support here is limited to salaries up to 44,000 Swedish crowns. And there are also a few requirements in relation to the employees to be able to use this system. You can see it's bullet point 2 there, that there's a requirement to have a local CBA, a collective bargaining agreement. And if you have a collective bargaining agreement within the company, you need to enter into a local one to be able to use this support scheme. If you don't have a collective bargaining agreement, you need to reach a written agreement with at least 70% of the employees in the workplace in order to be eligible for this scheme. And as you can see at the bottom of this page, there is also the employer also needs to fulfill the requirements below here in order to be eligible for the support. Point 2 to 3 are probably easily fulfilled in the current situation, but for point 1, the employer needs to prove evidence of the temporary and financial problems. We do not yet how detailed this must be, but there is guidelines to be expected. And also point 4, the employer has to have taken other measures to cut costs. For example, by terminating probationary employment, fixed-term employment, consultants, etc. And those that are not business critical. And then, to summarize this, Sweden's path, generally speaking, is different. Only yesterday, we were also informed by the Public Health Agency that the spread of infection in Stockholm has probably now reached its peak. Still, we keep the restrictions for the time being. However, for a business perspective, companies are of course still suffering, and we may therefore expect additional proposals in certain sectors, but we will surely face, as in all countries, companies that will not be viable as a consequence of the coronavirus. Something that has been affected indirectly by corona, and what I would like to mention as a final point in my part of the presentation, is the fact that the vast majority of CBAs in Sweden came to an end on the 31st of March this year. The employees' organizations and the trade unions had started negotiating new CBAs earlier this year, but they agreed to postpone the negotiations until this autumn. From a practical point of view, this means for employers with a collective bargaining agreement that you have not been able to get the updated level of salary increases to be applied as from 1st of April 2020. This means that any salary increases according to CBAs that are usually mandatory, they have to be postponed until the negotiations have been concluded, and that will be later this year. This was what I had to say about Sweden for the time being. I will now hand it over to Claude to speak about Norway.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are comfortable, either attending from home office or in your office, if you're so lucky that you can be there. I will guide you now through the same issues in Norway. If we start with the current lockdown restrictions or situation, I think it makes sense to compare the situation with Denmark. So in Norway and Denmark, it seems quite similar, at least when it comes to how the infection has spread, and also for the measures that have been implemented. We have also been under a light lockdown situation since the middle of March, starting with all kindergartens and schools were closed, and also some businesses, quite similar to what we have heard from Denmark. And we have started this week to reopen some activities that I will come back to in the end of my session. There are two issues that it seems to be perhaps more specific for Norway. We have this quarantine regime, which is something that has been imposed through regulations and also subject to penalty. It's a criminal offense if you breach them, and the purpose is obviously to try to limit the risk for further infection. So if you have been in contact, whether through your work or in private, been in contact physically with someone who actually is infected by corona, or if you have been closer to that person for 2 meters for more than 15 minutes, then you are obliged to go in a 14-day quarantine, meaning that you have to stay at home with restrictions for what you can do. We also there's no ban for traveling outside your home. People can travel, but like in the other countries as well, unnecessary traveling should be avoided and reduced to a minimum. And social distancing, I guess that will be one of the top 3 words from this year that we will remember. Social distancing applies also in Norway, so 2 meters at least if possible. Home working also recommended. Most of us have been working from home now. I think this will be the 5th week. And based upon what we have heard so far from our health authority, this is probably something that we'll just get used to at least until this side of the summer. We also have the specific quarantine rule which applies for individuals who travel to Norway. It doesn't matter if you have been traveling out from Norway and return, or if you're traveling to Norway for the first time. As the main rule, you then automatically have to go in a 14-day quarantine. So of course, if you are not living in Norway, you would have to stay in a hotel or similar for 14 days before you can start to do what you intended to do. I will then move on to the obligations and workforce management matters. And I believe for the health and safety measures, it's very similar to what we heard Jenny explain for Sweden, Seppo for Finland, and then one for Denmark. And we also have a lot of guidelines that are imposed by our health authorities, but also various sectoral guidelines. And we'll see more of them now, which will be customized to different parts of the industries as they now start to reopen. Because reopening of industries will be conditional upon that the entity, the companies actually can demonstrate that they have implemented the necessary guidelines for reducing and preventing the risk of infection, etc. We also had an increasement in questions, like in Sweden, for how to handle the home office situation. I would not say that a Norwegian employer as such would be obliged to take the cost for buying new shares or office equipment, etc. But I would say that for many employers, they should, and they have often done that, offer the employees to pick up office equipment that they need to find a reasonable working place at home. For the management of the workforce, well, like in the other countries, social distancing is the important thing here. And to do that, of course, the quick fix is to send people home, working from home where that's possible. And that's also the recommendation from the authorities, like I said. Some type of work obviously cannot be done from home. There you would need to find out other solutions, how to handle it. And like in Denmark, you can if you send someone home and they have nothing to do, no work to do, you still have to pay them salary. So the solution has been for all companies who either have had less work to do, and I think that has been more or less the situation in Norway, because Norwegian companies suffers during this situation. They will then have to consider to lay off employees. I will come back and explain that shortly. We have also seen a lot of new regulations. So I have to say that it's almost a full-time job to just keep updated with new regulations in this field. For an employer point of view, in addition to layoff, it is important to be aware of that we have temporary new regulation for sick leave or absence if it's due to corona matters, and that also covers not only that if you're infected, but also if you're in quarantine, which is quite important, because if you're in quarantine, you can be healthy, but you could still be entitled to receive sick pay. That's because in Norway we have a general sick pay system where the employer has to pay full salary up to, well, full sick pay based upon a yearly salary of approximately 100,000 crowns. And of course that could be quite expensive when people are forced to stay at home in quarantine, and if they are not able to work at the same time. So the government, they have preliminarily decided that all corona-related absence, in that case, the employer only has to pay sick pay for the first 3 days. Otherwise, if you're sick due to other reasons than corona, because life is going on, also, believe it or not, the people can fall in the stairs at home during when they are working from home. Then the ordinary period will be 16 days where the employer has to pay. So these are details, but just to understand that we use our system and we have applied them and customized them to the corona situation. Another benefit that is also you should be aware of is what we call care benefits. It's normally a benefit that employees are entitled to if they have to stay at home with sick children. And with sick children, we are talking about children below 12 years old, or also until 18 years if they suffer if they are disabled or suffer for some specific disease. In that case, each parent under normal circumstances are entitled to receive sick pay or care benefits from the employer for 10 days, each of them per calendar year. That is if you have one or two, up to two children. If you have 3 or more, it's 15 days. And all these days have been doubled up during this situation. And the government has decided that the employer only has to pay for the first 3 days. So you can see that, well, there's an increasement in what the employees will receive during the circumstances, which are they are an effect of the restrictions that have been imposed, close of kindergarten and schools, etc. And at the same time that the employers' costs have been lifted and taken more by the Norwegian government. Okay, so for layoffs, just some highlights there. A layoff could be subject to 2 hours webinar as such, because it's very detailed. But I think it sounds quite similar, at least from a high level, like in Sweden and Finland. And layoff is the way we have chosen to handle the way how to handle wage reduction situation. And layoff is something that can be decided in case there is a temporary reduction. So if it's it's not something that you can use if you are actually facing a redundant situation. I normally like to say, if there's a light in the tunnel, we are in a layoff situation, and if it's quite dark, then you probably have to consider redundancy. Like in Sweden, Finland, requirements for consultation with unions and employee representatives. Layoff as such is governed by collective agreements in Norway, and if you're a company which is not bound by collective agreement, you still have to follow the main principle as such still, according to case law. And when the layoff period starts to run, then the employees can apply for unemployment benefits from the government. And we have also, like in the other countries, quite detailed regulation for notification periods, and also what we call the employer period, is the first days of the layoff period where the employer has to pay the salary. That was reduced from 15 days before the corona crisis to 2 days during the corona crisis. Okay. So quickly to government support schemes, which of course also, well, Norway has a huge oil fund, and there are a lot of economic measures that have been decided. We have called it in Norway phase 1, phase 2, and we are also now will be in the phase 3. But basically, the first part was to establish measures to avoid, well, first of all, layoff. But the result has actually been that they have increased. We have many 100,000 employees on layoff, which actually is the same as being unemployed. And the figures have not been so high since the Second World War, so it's quite serious. But there's at least some first measures there to reduce the cost for the employees, etc. Then we have perhaps more important measures in phase 2, reduced VAT, deferred payment deadlines for VAT, taxes, etc., state guaranteed loan schemes, and also, which is quite interesting, we have these new compensation schemes for companies with significantly reduced income. So, and that started last weekend. So, good to know. For employees, I have just mentioned in my slides some figures for how this works for layoff. I don't think I will go into details there. You can read it, study it, but basically, employees on layoff, they receive salary up to 600,000 for almost the first month of the layoff period, and then they are on a reduced unemployment benefit, which still is a little bit higher than the normal unemployment benefit, but quite a huge drop in the salary. This will be serious for employees in the end now of April and beginning of May, because now we are reaching 1 month since this layoff started. Finally, end of lockdown. Like I said, we started on Monday to reopen kindergartens. We also start to reopen some health services, typically which requires one-to-one appointments. And from next week, we will also start to reopen first to fourth grade in the schools, some classes in the university, and also some other services, like in Denmark. But all sporting, cultural events, etc., they are, for the time being, banned until the middle of June. I think that will be all. So, thank you. I will pass the word to Yvonne, I think.
Jenny. No, to Jenny, first of all.
Jenny.
Yes, a few words from me. And I was supposed to conclude with some summarizing the differences and the similarities in different countries, but we are running a bit short of time. So instead, before I pass over to Yvonne, who will take care of some questions from your attendees, I would just like to say that I hope you have all found our presentations useful. And as Yvonne mentioned before, we work together a lot on a daily basis, where we, for example, coordinate work between us. And we would like to especially mention that we every year at least have one full-day seminar together in the 4 Nordic countries covering the hottest topics in the Nordics. This year, we hope that it will take place in Copenhagen on the 19th of November. So do put that into your schedule if you're interested to join, and contact either of us 4, and we will be happy to send an invitation to you later on. And I will pass on to you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Jenny. And we don't have much time for questions, but I think we can do with 2 quick ones. For Sweden, there's a question. Is the sick leave support applicable to employee sickness related to corona only?
No, actually, this is general. So any sick leave during April and May will be paid by the state. So you don't need to provide a doctor's certificate either. So it will be possible, or any sickness.
Thank you, Jenny. And a quick question also for Norway. Is it possible to rescind or terminate employment offers before the new hire starts? And if so, what is the employee entitled to?
Well, it's not possible to give a very quick answer to that question, but basically, if you want to avoid that someone who you have already agreed to have an employment relationship to start the first day, you would actually need to follow the ordinary dismissal rules.
Okay, thank you, Claude. And I can see there's a quick question also in regard to the term CBA. CBA means collective bargaining agreements. I think that some of us just uses the CBA because it's easier, but it's really a collective bargaining agreement for those of you who've been wondering about that. I think that was really the questions that we will have time for today. Thank you very much from me as well, and I will pass the word to Annie for a few concluding comments.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvonne. We have now reached the end of today's session. As previously mentioned, if you have any queries for the presenters, you can contact them directly by email. If your query is related to a different jurisdiction, you can contact me at annie.laakso@iuslaboris.com or go to the people pages of our website to find the right contact. For some insightful information and further updates on coronavirus, I recommend you visit the Ius Laboris Corona page, which is regularly updated as the situation evolves. From there you can upload our coronavirus guide for international employers with information from 57 countries. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending today, and thanks also to our presenters for their insights. So with that, this webinar will now be ending. Thank you.